Hello, and welcome to the Physical Therapy Owners Club podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Shields. And today I've got a returning guest, Sharif Zeid of EmpowerEMR, formerly known as MW Therapy, right, Sharif?
You got
Um,
it.
we've had you on previously as a guest discussing some of the benefits of EMRs and in physical therapy clinic owners' lives. But today I want to talk, and I'm excited to bring you on because you've got a couple decades of experience with working with physical therapy owners, and specifically how to make the most of your EMRs. The framing of the discussion today, people, physical therapy owners, they do great at treating patients and maybe even marketing and getting numbers up, but from your experience, they're not leveraging EMRs the way they could to benefit their practices. And so I'm glad that we could talk about these things. We're going to talk about a few things in particular in which how people can use their EMRs maximally, optimize them, right? Or if they weren't thinking of their EMRs as a tool before, maybe this discussion can help them do that. So first of all, thanks for coming on and sharing this with us.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to be here again, and I take it as a good sign I was invited back, so I'm happy to be here, and hopefully I can add some value to everybody's day here with just a little bit of tidbits and nuggets and sort of things we've learned or I've learned as the years have gone by. Talking to practices basically every day, almost of every week of every year, and
Right.
just being able to bring some of that to the benefit of your listeners. So I'm excited.
Great. Well, let's get into it. One of the
Yeah.
first things that you brought up as we were discussing the topic for today, it was around reporting. And I've always been somewhat disappointed with the reports that I've seen in the past. Now, I've been out of the game for 5 or 6 years uh, after selling my practices, so I don't know what progress has been made. But that was always kind of a shady section in some of the EMRs. I either didn't trust the numbers I was getting, or I wasn't able to get the exact data that I wanted, and it was kind of hard
Yeah.
and not techy, that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about how people can make the most of their EMRs on the reporting side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, what you described is a common refrain, and so it's always a bummer, right? As somebody on the other side of the table saying, okay, what are the problems we're seeing out there? What are people having challenges with as owners? And I would say there's kind of two sides to this coin. Number one you know, is really just taking a deep breath and really deciding what metrics you want to focus on. Before we talk about the EMR and how to get the data, I do find that in talking with a lot of owners, you're actually struggling with that question. I think
Mm,
there are so many things you can read on the internet and beyond. You should follow this, and this is the new hot KPI of the week, or OKR if you like the new phrase for it.
mhm.
And then all of a sudden you're chasing something new. And in my experience working with practices, I've seen that happen. And what the challenge with that is A, when you're bouncing back and forth between metrics, it leads to a lot of frustration. As an owner, it can be frustrating because you're chasing things and that feels unstable. And then for your team, it's really detrimental because they have no idea what the goal is anymore. If we were chasing this KPI for a while and then all of a sudden next week we change, and then the week after that, it's like all of a sudden I watched something and it said we should follow visits per hour. That's the most important thing in the world. And
Yeah.
then 2 weeks later, it's units per visit. And there's all these metrics, that are out there, and they're all great, by the way. It's just really picking which ones are going to be important to you. And the way you should pick is really just by asking the question why first. I mean, is stability what you're looking for? Then there are some metrics that would be relevant. If is high growth what you're looking for, then that would be a different case. If it's everything's kind of good but our reimbursements are low, that might drive you to look at a different metric and try and identify, say, disparities between how individual therapists are coding. So you sort of start with the business case of what you're trying to do, whatever it might be. Usually it's not to decline, so it's usually growth or stability depending on where you are in your practice life cycle and all those things. And then you can back into the metrics, and then once you kind of have an idea for the metrics, that's where you open the door into the EMR and you start to look at the reports that it can offer or the reports that could potentially be built in it. And then you can kind of fit these pieces together, and you shouldn't sort of have religious adherence to any one side. If there's a metric you want to follow and the EMR has one that's very similar, it probably serves the same business purpose, and you don't have to go sort of nuts that it's not exactly the one that you had in mind. And then the last piece of this with the EMR specifically is uh, understanding that all reports have have a methodology. So many have some sort of basis for how they calculate things. And people always say, I've said this before, and like, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, let's just ask you a simple question. So Nathan, from 5 years ago when you're in practice, how many visits did you have last month? That's an easy question. I had, well, it's not easy, right? Well, do you take out the cancels and no-shows? Do you take out the free consults that you offer to patients that because you went to some event? And then, well, we don't want to count visits that are in this color code because those don't really produce profit for us. So you quickly see how fast the simple question of how many visits did you have last month can mushroom. And so on the EMR side of the world, obviously when we build standard reports, we make some of those assumptions, right? We decide some of those methodologies, and then we do our best to communicate them to folks so that they can trust them. They can know what the idea behind the report is, the concept behind the report, and then some of the assumptions perhaps or methodologies that went into it. And I can tell you that all reports have that, whether it's average reimbursement or visits per hour, which hours and which visits, and
I
units
see.
per hour, which units and which
Mhm.
visits again. And so it can, so I think that sort of the long story short is, with respect to sort of the business side of things, it's all about understanding the metrics you want to track and why you're tracking them. And in fact, if you can articulate why, your team will buy into them even better. If you just tell them we're tracking this now and it's important we get it from 4 to 8, they'll be like, okay. But if you tell them why, then they may have higher buy-in, right? And that can, and then on the EMR
Mhm.
side, it's really
Mhm.
about exploring and investing. So exploring means try all the reports. We
Right.
have people get to be creatures of habits in software, and they run the same 2 reports, and there's like a million other reports they could run. And then invest in it, learn it, understand what the methodology is, ask questions if that's what you need to do, and then build that trust. And then you can really feel confident in the ultimate, which is making decisions, taking actions based on the report that you have.
Do you feel that that the users aren't leveraging customer service or the ability to go and getting some of that training and learning?
It's really it's like anything else. I think there's a wide range of
Okay.
sort of attitudes and approaches and so forth. I mean, some folks ask a lot of questions, some don't ask any at all, and some are in between. So it's really, yeah. What I do find though is there's definitely also variability in just systems don't there's a difference between having a system and implementation of a system. Having a
Right.
system, like you got it and now you have it. Implementation is really how you employ it, and it does the business tasks that you want it to do. And I do find that implementation can vary widely. Some are just sort of just hitting it and they're using it, and others are deeply thinking about, what does it mean for my workflow, what does it mean for my team, what does it mean for my patients, how do all the timing pieces fit together, and if they're taking business processes and basically making them technical, or infusing those into the EMR and vice versa.
Yeah. I'm just one of those people, and I'm working on this throughout my life, where if it's not readily available and seen on the screen with a couple of punches of keys, then it's not available, period. Whereas it would behoove me, and I try to do this more often now, is to actually make the call and say, hey, this is the report that I want. How do I access it? And then you can tell me
Yeah,
yes or no, we do it, or yeah, it's easy, just go over here. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was there. Right.
perfect.
Or,
Yeah,
there's plenty of people, and I've heard it from both sides as well, that even if you had training videos for your program, what is it? A small percentage actually complete the training videos.
of course. Yeah.
They want it to be
Yeah,
readily available.
yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, listen, and again, this is where you see variability in not just in practices, but individuals within the practice. Some will watch every video from start to finish, some will watch a few. I think that's where, for us, fun and challenge is making things intuitive enough where you can just go in and use it. Most people have never watched a video on how to use Gmail, but seems like most people know how to use Gmail, at least to some degree. So that's the fun of being in the software space and kind of working with it. But yeah, I mean, I think what you're sharing is common, right? We want it to be readily available, and that's something we work on hard here, is to continue to just make the common things and keep up with trends so that the sort of like the reports that are desired will be there in as easy a fashion as possible.
Yeah, the in regards to the KPI numbers as well, or the
Yeah.
KPI metrics, I can see two issues there, right? The first being that the the small business entrepreneur mind switching between KPIs every month and their team being
Yeah.
like, okay, which KPI are we focused on this month? And so
Yeah.
they do a little bit of work for 15 to 30 days and then it all fizzles out. And so it's important to understand what some of those cardinal metrics are. And that's where I'll put the plug in, having some kind of coach, some kind of mentor to say, these are some of the standard cardinal metrics that you need to run by, and you should, and this is why they're important. So let's focus on these here first. Those others might be nice if we need to get to that point, or if we need to dive a little bit deeper. But there are some high level ones that you should be aware of in order to make sure you're most profitable, most functional, get the best results, et cetera. And that's where a coach can definitely help. If it's not a coach, I mean, just post on a physical therapy Facebook group. Like, what are the cardinal metrics you guys are using, and take the top 3 to 5. I mean, everyone's going to come up with different metrics, but take the top 3 to 5 answers and focus on those if you really don't know where to start.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. I think having a sounding board is really helpful. I've seen a lot of clients have success with working with a coach, working with a mastermind group, posting on
Mhm.
Facebook, just something to add a level of accountability. And so, it'd probably be embarrassing if you had to go to your coach and say, I'm changing my metrics again after 42 hours of tracking.
Yeah.
So it just adds that sort of piece to it. And I love your idea about cardinal metrics. I think one successful thing I've seen out there is, let's say you have 5 things or metrics you're going to focus on. 3 or 4 of them are the cardinal ones. They never change, or they very infrequently change. And then there's 1 or 2 where, like, hey, for the next 6 months, our big thing is to have twice as many evaluations as we had in the previous term, and so we change a couple metrics to focus on that goal. You hopefully achieve it. You give your staff a party if you can, and then it's kind of like finite. But the 3 or 4 didn't change. It's just
Right.
that 1 or 2 for a short-term goal or for a short-term bump. So I think that's awesome for
Yeah, and the
sure.
idea being that those 3 to 4 don't change, but the other ones that you might focus on are going to ultimately improve those top 3 to 4 metrics, right? I call them sub KPIs, sub metrics, because they feed into the higher metrics and make them better,
Right on.
nonetheless. But yeah, great. So what's one other thing that we can do to maximize our utilization of our EMRs?
If you're talking about on report specifically, or you want to move to something
Yeah,
else
let's
on
move
it?
on. I think we
All right.
beat that dog.
Okay. I mean, the next one I would say is, talking about sort of this nexus between staffing, burnout, hiring, retention, this whole realm of, that's been quite the topic, I would say, for the last, really, since COVID. I mean, I'm sure it was an issue before then, but it seemed to really take off as a challenge for practices in the intervening time. And it's everything, right? It's therapists burning out or feeling, overwhelmed by sort of the universe of tasks they have to do. It's not just treating
Mhm.
the patient, it's the
Yeah.
documentation, it's the coding, it's all those things. It's the certainly lots of pressure on the front desk, can't hire, can't find, or can't whatever, can't retain. So I think where the connection is between this and really EMR and technology in general is, technology has also changed a tremendous amount. I mean, AI, for example, is all the rage now. And for therapists, for example, we're seeing adoption now of really new technologies like a scribe type tool. And that's probably a podcast by itself to talk about, speaking instead of writing notes, and not
Yeah, we just
speaking like,
had
yeah,
we had Jake on, Jake
oh,
Mihalski
great.
of Comprehend
Yeah,
PT just a few
great
episodes
guy.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, but speak to text. I mean, documentation, hugest headache that any
absolutely.
provider
Yeah.
has, and there are benefits that can help. There are AI benefits that can help.
No doubt. And so it ties back to, that's for them. It's really about burnout, right? If you can
Mhm.
reduce the total time on task, if you can reduce the sort of after hours type of stuff that we hear about, unfortunately, often. So I think that's one. On the front desk, I think we're seeing a lot of automation, taking away tasks from that desk. And so whether it's, letting patients self book or letting patients self register, and that also opens a whole 24/7 aspect to a practice that never really existed before. But also just some of the more mundane tasks, following up with patients, sometimes manually sending marketing emails. We see that as often being on that plate that could be taken off by technology. And so if you're able to reduce that, then you're left in sort of one of a couple hopefully good places. One is if you're struggling to fill that position, you may have a lot less pressure to do so, because now a lot of these tasks are able to happen on their own or happen, at the patient's hands. And so that reduces the pressure on you to hire. If
Mhm.
you already have somebody, you may be able to take many of their hours and dedicate them to more lucrative tasks, instead of paying them to read a list and make a million phone calls, and there's a way for that communication to be automated, then they may be able to work more on outreach to refers or something like that,
Mhm.
or pivot them a
Mhm.
little bit towards marketing. So taking time, keeping the time, paying for it, but getting better value for it than sort of the mundane stuff. And then the last piece is just, with that automation, it also leads to a lot of really good patient experiences. I mean, it's funny, we hear all the time, like, we're getting Google reviews from patients. We need Google reviews. Well, patients are obviously going to assess you on a variety of different things, right? How is my clinician? How is my care? Probably how is my outcome to some degree, but they're also going to use just their experience in sort of doing business with you. And whether
Mhm.
you like it or not, they're going to compare you to Amazon or something, which is,
Yeah,
let's call that like the gold standard of ease, right? It's just so
right.
fast, and the stuff shows up like 2 hours later, and you don't know how
Yeah.
the guy got there so fast. So it's kind of along those lines. And so when you start to open up this, like, hey, do your own stuff, and they're like, this is fantastic, I want to sit on the couch and book out 3 PT visits at midnight, right? Then they can do it. And so
Mhm.
it's good for everybody. And so I think those are a couple ways that, if you're not using your EMR in any of those ways, if you're not automating things, if you're not at least considering a patient portal type thing, you're missing out. I mean, I think there's a lot of benefit to be had there. And possibly many tools you should be using and could be using if you take the time to implement them.
Well, I think that goes back to some people. I hate to use this phrase, but I'm sure it happens quite a bit in our space. But just having their head in the sand, and they're not aware of the updates and the possibilities that the EMRs could do, especially if they've been with one for 5, 10, 15 years. They're in a we're creatures of habit. We don't want to mess up our patient flow by trying to do more. But doing more initially in order to ease on the back end, right, is the goal. And so just reaching out and finding out what the capabilities are and how we can make this a little bit easier on everybody.
Yeah, and EMR is not what it was 10 years ago. I think that's the other thing to realize, is that it really was. I mean, everybody calls it now EMR, but back then EMR referred primarily to documentation, but now there's marketing and reporting, like we just talked about, and patient portals, and there's just, it's a universe. And so, there's just many things you may not even know, and that are worth, refreshing. The days of just using an EMR to, okay, I write my notes and book my appointments, is long gone. And that's only going to get more intensive over the coming years as we continue to fold in more features and add more stuff and touch more parts of the business, as EMRs like Empower have become sort of the central nervous system technologically for
Yeah.
practice. It's like their
Yeah. The,
operating system.
the backbone for
So
sure.
exactly. So it's actually really exciting, and there's a lot there. And then the last thing I'll just put a plug in for is, if you're listening to this and saying, I should do that, don't go crazy and try and implement 19 things at once. Just pick something to like do in the next quarter. Like, hey, by the end of
Yeah.
next quarter, we want to have patients booking online. That's our goal.
Right.
Because I find people flip the switch, and they're kind of been stable for 10 years, and then all of a sudden they're like, we should do all this stuff, and then they try and do it all at once, and then it's just,
Crash and
it's too
burn. Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I could
Exactly.
see that.
Exactly.
I could definitely see that. Well,
Yeah.
one thing that I always thought was interesting is we talk occasionally about onboarding successfully, onboarding providers specifically successfully, because we believe that a well onboarded provider brings someone who has much more satisfaction, confidence, productivity, um, and honestly retention. Uh, if that part of the onboarding process goes well. And the question is frequently like, what do I do besides let them shadow some patients once in a while? And I think it's very odd that more consideration isn't taken for setting aside time for them to do the actual video trainings of the EMRs and give them time to actually get really comfortable with this tool that they're going to use. Because nothing, well, from my experience, nothing provides greater frustration than documentation headaches. Yeah, I can write a soap note left and right if it's a piece of paper and I have a pen, but to navigate the EMR, especially if they're new to the clinic and new to this EMR, then I think it would behoove them to give the providers the time, take on the cost that it takes for them to actually get really comfortable with that EMR and watch all the videos, get comfortable with it, know what reports they need to look for if they need to look for some, but really get comfortable with how to leverage it and make the most of it. And I think that would be really useful and help with retention down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's pay to me, it's pay now or pay later. I mean, you're gonna pay. So in other words, if you front end the costs, quote unquote, by allowing the time, then you get that back in the future because they're going to be more productive. And I think if you're onboarding somebody new, the goal is to get them to be productive as soon as possible, right? So that they're contributing financially to the practice. And if, it's 3 months later and they're still struggling with the tool, and it's because you just didn't just give them this like few hours that were needed at the front end to just get it out of the way. So it's pay now or pay later. And I'm a big buy once, cry once person. So you just
Mhm.
that's just part of the cost. Everybody knows there's a cost to onboard new employees. And so you absorb that cost, and I would rather personally take it up front. And I think long term it will lead to a better outcome for that provider and for the practice itself. So
Yeah,
no,
and
no.
if you have some kind of program like that, then why not leverage it in part of your recruiting message?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be the highlight of your message, but say, listen, we use blankety blank EMR, we use Empower EMR. It provides us these opportunities, and it minimizes the headache of your documentation. It minimizes the headache of your patient flow because this is what we do. Here's an example. It shaves this much time off of
Yeah.
note taking, right? And so if you can leverage that to also recruit if you are properly and optimally using your EMR.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, your job offer probably says, here's what the commute looks like, and here's our facility. It's really nice and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, what's something they're going to touch every single day? And the EMR is the answer to that question. So absolutely, if you can say, we've invested in the tooling you need to sort of be successful and be efficient with your, we're going to set you up for success is essentially what the message is. And that's the same thing again as saying, we've invested in our facility, our equipment is good, we, have the following things to help
Hmm.
you,
Hmm.
and you'll be supported. It's just another tool in that toolbox. So
Yeah,
I think
and if
that's a
I
great
had
point.
access to an AI scribe, man, that might be my lead. That might be my lead on the ad.
Yeah,
It's like, we've got the tools to minimize your documentation headache. Why don't you come check us out? And they'll be like,
yeah,
what? I hate documentation. And if you
yeah.
can shave off that time and I don't have to spend it at the keyboard, man, that would be a huge benefit to me, especially to those people who are taking or having to do notes at home at the end of the workday, right? That would definitely call to them.
And it's something differentiating too. I mean, I've had other conversations. You can just keep adding dollars to the salary until you really can't, and
Yeah,
that's because that's a business thing. And so you got to find, and you might be surprised. I mean, a potential person, prospective employee may be moved by that sort of mention of, what's the environment like to work with? Am I going to be well supported through the tools that are being used? More so than adding $500 a year to the annual salary, which at some
right.
point you're going to cap out anyways because it is what it is in the market, and also because that's just a race to nowhere. Everybody
Yeah.
can keep adding $500, and to what end? Eventually, it's unsustainable. So, finding new and different ways, through your EMR and other ways to sort of sweeten the pot, if you will, or make it that much more
Mhm.
attractive a position. It's great.
Yeah, and the last area that we want to talk about in terms
Yeah.
of making the most of EMRs is surrounding marketing. And I love that you're bringing it up because it's timely. I was on a call with a client a couple days ago, and numbers had dipped a little bit, maybe seasonal, whatever, but he was it forced him to actually go out and meet doctors for the first time, which was an enviable position because I was always talking to doctors because I was always looking for the next new patients. But this guy
Yeah.
had a situation where he had a wait list and now he doesn't have a wait list anymore. And now he's
Mm.
forced to talk to doctors and think about his marketing strategies. And he said, "What's the easiest way to get patients?" And I said, "Well, if you're not, you need to have relationships with doctors. I think that's appropriate, whether you have a wait list or not, that you have some kind of face-to-face meeting at least. Say, hey, I'm treating your patients." Um, but the cheapest and easiest way to get new patients is getting current referrals from your current patients, leveraging them. But also, you've got a list of hundreds, maybe thousands of people that you automatically have access to from your patient database. And if you're not leveraging that, again, that's the cheapest and easiest way to get new patients now, by reactivating them, asking them for family and friend referrals, you name it. And I don't think people are turning to their EMRs to look at that as a marketing tool enough.
I completely agree. I think there's a lot of parallels to the reporting thing, is that marketing seems super unapproachable, I think, because it's so big. It's like, should we do Facebook ads? Should we reach out to refer? Should we
Mhm.
have a conference? Should we run an event? And it becomes so overwhelming that, and then even other questions like, should we go buy a list from somewhere? I don't even know what list we're going to buy. And what are we going to do with the list? I don't know, but should we buy a list? I saw that that was a thing you do for marketing. So let's go down that route. And so because it's unapproachable, it quickly spirals. And then I think yeah, people go away from their EMR as sort of a good place, a really, really good place to start. And in some cases finish. I mean, you might have enough to live on in your EMR alone for many years, especially if you're a long established practice. I mean, if you just think about it very simply like this, if you could get 5 patients to reactivate, 5 patients to refer back to you a new friend or colleague, and get 5 referrers who haven't sent you anybody in the last 6 months to send you one person, that right there could be 15 evaluations, right? And so when we're talking about scale, we're not Walmart. We don't need to sell 1,000 more in the next hour to show growth. We need to be able to get 10 patients, 15 patients at an average course of care of, say, 8 to 10 visits. That's 150 visits. And then, once you show you can do it once, then you just go get the next 15. And again, your list may be expansive. We recently had a client on board who'd been with a prior system for years. They had like 4,000 people on their referral list. Now,
Mhm.
how many of those really referred to them in the last 12 months? Probably not as many as they would like. But if they just
Yeah.
went from the bottom of the list and made a few phone calls, they probably could drum up some action and just say, hey, did you remember we're here? Or have you been referring elsewhere? We've made all these improvements. We have this new location. We have new equipment, or we're
Right.
employing the latest. I mean, there's just so many good stories to tell. And therapists, PTs love to talk about the clinical aspect, and they should, and they can talk about the quality outcomes they're delivering and so forth. So yeah, for marketing, I'm a big proponent of like an EMR first type approach. Like, start there. What do you have? What do you have to work with? What do you have for patients? What do you have for zip code data that tells you where your patients are coming from? What do you have for referrer lists? And then, like with our system, right? What can you leverage in the system itself to then
Mhm.
communicate with those people directly? We have tools for that. But even if your EMR is a little bit more rudimentary and you're just going to be able to export the list, at least you can go to something and use it as an email blast or something like that.
Mhm.
And stop worrying about what big companies do for marketing, right? They do things that because they have money and they have data at a scale that none of us can really touch. And I'm talking about the big companies like Coca-Cola or whatever.
Yeah.
So just focus on what you can do, which is just making sure you're communicating your message within an appropriate area to the right people. And then remember that, unfortunately, as much as we love it, marketing is not one and done. You have to do
Right.
it all the time.
It's
So it has to
consistency.
become mechanized and like
Mhm.
consistent. And so you reach out to this referrer and they don't respond to you. All right, we'll see you again in 6 months. We'll get ping you again back then, and just maybe you're on vacation or whatever the case might be. So,
Mhm.
so I think EMRs are treasure trove. I think especially now that for most practices they're 10 plus years in an EMR, right? Maybe 15 on the high end. Lots of data, lots of patients. What are the chances those people need new care? High, I would say, for many. What are
Mhm.
the chances referrers are looking for places to send patients? High. So it's tremendously valuable, and
Yeah.
you
If you,
already own it. That's the
right.
best part.
I was going to say, if a marketing company had access to your thousands of patients on the database, they would pay you a lot of money to leverage that list for marketing purposes. So
Mhm.
you already have it free of charge. Leverage it as much as possible. And the best way to do so is to do so, like you said, consistently, mechanically, systematically, is just use it over and over. And I don't think it takes a lot of effort. If you need to talk to somebody in marketing about what that content looks like, then okay, yeah, get a marketing person, talk to a coach. But I mean, even I'm not a marketing person, and I would leverage my physician referral list for with a monthly newsletter. And I mean, yeah, it's old school, but if my numbers were down in a given month, I could probably go back and see that I didn't send out the monthly newsletter that month, right? And we're talking like 150 newsletters. I did the design through Fiverr, and I repurposed the content. Once I made about 6 or 8 pieces of content, I just repurposed, redesigned, and never had to make more content. But it's even simpler than that. And I don't know, like I said, being naive or a little bit ignorant to the EMR space at this point, but there is capabilities to text through the EMR, email through the EMR, and maybe you send out group text, group emails that don't require a ton of content at all. Hey, Mother's Day just passed us by a week or so ago here as we're recording. Do send out a blast for free consults for the mothers of past patients who are mothers. Set it up for a certain day for a few hours and see if you can reactivate a few of them. And that's a simple text and send it out. Bam, you're good to go. But it's
Yeah,
working
yeah.
on that and just putting a little bit of the brain space on it to make it a consistent calendared activity.
Yeah, unbelievably. And to my surprise, one of our popular sort of re-engagement, reactivation marketing tools is a fax blaster where you can
Totally.
fax hundreds of referrers at once.
Yep.
And I was like, faxes, who would do that? It's remarkably effective. And,
Right.
because they're deleting emails, but they get the fax. And
Mhm.
I also want to concur with you very much that a lot of people get hung up on the volume and quality of the content. Obviously, we want to put out junk. That's not what we want to do. But at the same time, because it's regular, it's supposed to be regular. This isn't writing a dissertation. So you don't want to spend 6 months crafting a single fax blast. You want to just say, here's the deal. And half the page is just reminding them of where you are and what your hours
Right.
are and what major insurances you accept. And the top half is like, we just got a new piece of equipment, or we just had a new hire,
Yeah.
or like you said, it's Mother's Day. How about a free consult? And then the next week, you delete Mother's Day from it and you put in like first day of summer free consults, right? And you're
There
just like
you go.
rolling with it. And then
Right.
the week after that, it's July 4th, Independence Day consults. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be, because no one's going to spend as much time reading it as you are obviously creating it. So you want to temper your sort of, I know a lot of PTs are perfectionists, and
Yeah.
particularly on the clinical side. And so they don't want to put on anything that's not perfect. And that's a good tendency, right? But we want to keep it like in check for this kind of stuff. So you take that EMR, you get the list, and the last thing I would say is you can't overdo the cadence too. You can go too frequently, and then you're just like trying to write too much, and people then will unsubscribe or they'll start to tune you out. So I mean, you want to be reasonable with what you don't want to fax blast every week, maybe once a
No.
quarter or something.
Right.
And monthly newsletters seem to be common, and things like that. And
Hmm.
so you keep it reasonable. And kind of tying all these things together is, if you can automate some of that front desk stuff, maybe they can contribute towards this type of effort, right?
Yeah.
Because they're hanging out now, or they have an extra hour that you created through some automation, and then you're doing it. So you're doing your marketing, and then you're coming back to the beginning of reporting, and hopefully seeing the results, and seeing those patients come in, or seeing those reactivations. So it's a symbiotic, like everything works together kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And, from a broader perspective, utilizing the EMRs, to go back to our initial point, I think they are underutilized for some of these aspects. And if people aren't aware of the capabilities, then it's important that they take the time and the energy to do so and to see simply what's out there. Maybe they don't know where to start, they don't know what their EMR is capable of, then it's worth it to actually take the time and study up on them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're in anything you're investing in, you should, make sure you're getting the most out of it. And EMR has evolved so much. I think to your point earlier, like people need to just catch up with what's out there. People need to realize that this is something that has to be sort of curated and cared for and implemented. And so that's like a team thing. You got to get everybody on board with it and make sure you're leveraging the tool to the max. And then the third thing would just be like, just start there. If you Let's say you're coming from the other side and you're saying, well, I just discovered this business need. We want to do more marketing.
Mhm.
Just as like somebody sits in a team meeting and says, we should do more marketing. Okay, great. EMR first, start there. Or, hey, I think we should improve our website. All right, go to your EMR first and see what maybe a plug and play portal could do for your website.
Mm,
We want to reach out to all of our patients from the last 6 months. Okay, go to your EMR first. So it
yeah.
just start there, and then obviously you may need other tools. It's possible, right? But generally, I think you're going to find at least for clients, for example, of ours, like they're finding because we're trying to deliver on that. We're trying to bring them the sort of the all-in-one and like do your
Hmm.
stuff here and that sort of thing. So um, most things are born from a business need. It's usually saving money, saving time, or making more money, or having more time. And then again, how do you kind of get to that sort of thing? And that's where I think thinking of EMR first is a good place to think about
Yeah,
it.
definitely. Well, I need to ask, what's on the mind of everyone who's listening is what inspired the move from MW therapy to Empower
Yeah,
EMR?
it's a really good question. So it's funny. If I'm being totally honest, first thing is I would say, if you're contemplating a rebrand, do it.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think it's sort of hard when you're doing it, and at points you may say, I wish we weren't doing this, but we had the sort of this concept of maybe we should align our product name a little bit more, with what we are doing specifically, obviously being an EMR, and then just with our sort of general theme and trying to empower PTs, right? PTs are trying to empower their patients and get them better so they can do the stuff they want to do and live a better, fuller life. And we felt that so that those two reasons, aligning a little bit more with what we do and getting sort of our theme and messaging across, I think were the two big ones. A
All
lot of
right.
people thought M and W were like initials or that we were a practice, and so you learn, you live and you learn, and so we're really happy to be on the other side of it.
I
But
got you.
somebody told me while we were doing it, if you're thinking about do it, just do it. So now I pass that on because in retrospect, I agree. I think if you feel like your practice name for some reason isn't capturing your mantra, your feeling, it's okay. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun changing all your email addresses and all that jazz,
Oh,
but it does get done
yeah.
and life goes on. So I would recommend it. Yeah.
I gotcha. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a good marketing tool as well. It's like, hey, we've got this new name. We need to blast this. We need to let you know. All of a sudden, you have a lot more marketing content out there.
100%. 100%.
I gotcha. Well, being as MW therapy in the past, but now EMR, remind everyone how long you guys been around, how long you've been in the space.
Yeah, yeah. So we're closing in on 20 years in the space. I've obviously been here since the start. Our first notes were written into at the time MW Therapy, now Empower,
Mm.
about 2006. So a little bit of experience, tens of millions of notes and claims and dollars and all
Right.
those things flowing through the system. And really, though, with all that, we credit our clients really for helping us figure out where the product should and continue to be growing, and what's important to them. And that's what's driven us through all these years, is really client feedback. So we remain very innovative. We continue to roll out new stuff, and I think the next 10 years for PTEMR, maybe this is another podcast, but will be very interesting, right? The last 10 years
Yeah.
were dominated by the tail end of people getting EMRs in the first place.
Right.
I would say 2014, 13 was sort of a very common time. And now we're in the age of AI, and we've got more payer battles, and they're using AI too. So we're going to have battle of the AIs, and it's going to be, and then we've got all these other things and trying to, again, get people. It's funny how the goal doesn't change. It's just get people back to treating patients because that's what they wanted to
Yeah.
do. And frankly, do it profitably. I mean, that that
Yeah.
that sort of hasn't changed, but how we approach it and how we get there definitely has and will continue to change.
And if people wanted to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Yeah. I would love if you'd visit EmpowerEMR.com. It's certainly one place you can get a demo of our product if you're so inclined. But personally, I'd love to connect with you, anybody on LinkedIn who's listening. So you can just
Yeah.
search for me. I know I have a super easy name to spell, Sharif Zeid, and you can just look for me and send me a connect request. I'm happy to be a resource for people and just talk anytime. And if an EMR switch is something you're contemplating, myself and our team here would love to connect with you and see if it's a good fit and figure it out for
Great.
you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me again, man.
Yeah. It was
I
awesome.
appreciate it.
So next time we'll talk about like AI and Terminator and like
Yes.
Skynet and all that kind of stuff. We'll get it going.
Right.
So thanks for having me. I
Exactly.
appreciate it.
All right. Good to
Yeah.
see you, man. Bye bye.
All right. Bye now.